Well, hello, everybody. I'm Catherine Boyle from Key Ministry. I'm joined today by Jess Ronne. Jess is a member of the Key Ministry writing team, and you may know her from some of her social media or some of her writing on the Key Ministry blogs, or you may know her from her own social media. She reaches a broad audience, and I am just delighted to welcome her today to talk with our audience. She's written a book recently, but she's got a lot of things that are in the works, a lot of things that she's done in her life. And I'm just real excited that you have some time to spend with us today, Jess. So welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I always enjoy chatting with you, so this should be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we dive right in, for those who are on the webinar, thanks so much for signing up and for attending. And if you have a question or a comment, feel free to post a comment in the chat and I will work those into the conversation as we're able. And if you're watching on the Facebook live stream, do the same thing. We will be monitoring that as well. And again, as we're able to work it into the conversation, we'll ask your questions or share your comments with Jess. And at the end, we'll definitely share ways you can get in touch with her so that, if your question doesn't get answered or you think of something later, you're able to connect with her afterwards as well. So, well, Jess, as I said, has done a lot of things. And so you may know her from, some of the various things that she's done. She's online, she's known as Jess Plus the Mess, which I think is just so refreshingly honest, because she has 8 kids. I just said to her a minute ago, you have 6 more kids than me. I mean, and I can't remember everything that I write down to do, but anyway, so in those 8 kids, she has a son, Luke, who has significant disabilities. She's a mom of 8 kids in a blended family. And she has written and spoken extensively about the mental health crisis for caregivers of individuals with disabilities, and is actually working on a documentary called Unseen about that very thing. So we're going to address each of these areas where you've worked and spoken throughout the conversation today. But again, if you've got a question about any one of these areas, don't hesitate to share it in the chat on Facebook or in the webinar itself. So I have read your second book, Blended, but I have not read your first book, Sunlight Burning at Midnight. But that was a memoir, right? I mean, that was about your experience losing your young husband to brain cancer, correct?
That was more Luke's story,
Okay.
starting basically with the diagnosis that we received for him when he was 20 weeks old in utero, and just chronicles my journey through that, through faith or through doubt to a faith that the Lord would heal him, and then flipping that narrative only 3 years later with the terminal diagnosis of my husband. Mm-hmm. And then, that story ends for the most part with Jason's death, and then picks up again in Blended with what happened after that.
Right. Well, and Blended is, the perfect title for a blended family. There's so many in our world. Mm-hmm. And amazingly enough, your second husband's wife, for those of you who don't know, she also died of glioblastoma brain cancer around the same time that your husband did. Is that correct?
4 days after Jason passed away.
Okay. And then you guys got together and got married really quickly, right? It was, I get the whole, you see God's hand in things, but yeah. It's still, did it feel rushed to you, or did it just feel like you knew this is what God wanted you to do?
Yeah, it just felt right. We felt like we were stepping into God's plan for us and being obedient. And there were a lot of dynamics. He lived in Oklahoma. I lived in Michigan. We both blogged through our cancer journeys with our spouses, and a stranger from Pennsylvania who followed both of us reached out to me and said, there's this young widower in Oklahoma. He's not doing very well. He has 3 young children. Maybe you could just reach out to him and lend some encouragement. and the rest was history. Within a year, we were married.
Wow.
And like I said, he lived in Oklahoma. I was in Michigan. There are a lot of dynamics, 7 young children, including Lucas with profound special needs. So we felt like, why wait? Now,
Right.
in saying that, there were some things we could have done differently, like therapy.
Right.
We kind of ran on endorphins for about 2 years,
Yeah.
new love and just
Yeah.
excitement, new life. And then you kind of hit the wall and you go, oh, this is reality. And we
Yeah.
probably need to address some of these issues.
Right. Well, so, I've had people say, how do you know, like when you're writing a book, when you're finished? Well, a question for you. So you wrote your memoir, but how did you know when it was time to write Blended? Or, why was Blended a book that needed to be written just as much as your memoir?
It wasn't a book that needed to be written in my head. Um,
Okay.
I had this idea of a just keep living book, because
Okay.
that's my motto. And
Right.
it was going to be stories from our life. And I worked on it for about 3 or 4 years, just compiling these stories. And my agent and I would go back and forth. And she was like, this is blended. You guys are
Right.
blended. So we need to
Right.
somehow make this blended. And I fought against that with everything in me because I was
Wow.
like, I don't want to pigeonhole myself as
Right.
the blended family.
Right.
And so we kind of came to this agreement where it was sort of blended with grit and grace, which is a lot of stories from our life, which
Right.
happens to be blended. But I think just about anybody could relate to so many of our stories. Not that we did everything correctly. I'm just putting our stories out there. Like, this worked for us, this didn't work for us,
Right.
because I've had so many families who aren't blended even read it and say, I'm not even part of a blended family. I don't even have a child with disabilities, but this chapter really resonated with me about my own marriage and maybe what I should be looking at, or, however that may be.
Right. Well, and I agree. I mean, I don't have a blended family, but there were so many little nuggets of things that you talked about that are really helpful for any marriage. And, whether have a child with profound disabilities or not. But, and one thing that, I really appreciate about your ministry, your mission is that you talk really openly about things that are difficult, including mental health struggles. Um, and then mental health struggles in particular experienced by caregivers, because we've all experienced how isolating it can be to be at home and trying to prevent illness or take care of someone with illness since the onset of COVID. But it I think it's awakened a lot of people to what caregiving families go through on a day-to-day basis. But for those who may not really be aware, I sent you a question about statistics. Were you able to find any statistics on, how big of an issue the mental health crisis is for caregivers?
Yeah, I did. And just with the Lucas Project, my nonprofit, and then the documentary, we're big on statistics and
Yeah.
putting these out into the world. There are 16.3 million caregivers to a child with special needs. 30% of those caregivers say that their health has worsened due to the caregiving life. 43% of parent caregivers experience high stress, and 26% report that their health is fair or poor. That's a quarter of that population. And those are the only ones who are telling the truth.
Right.
I think a lot of caregivers get into this mode of, I'm fine, we're fine, everything's good. And they put their head down and they just get her done, because
Right.
nobody is going to step into that space for the
Right.
most part, has been our experience as caregivers. So we just live in this constant fight or flight, and we put our head down and we get it done because we love our child, we love our family, and he or she needs us.
Right.
But that doesn't diminish the fact that these caregivers are living very isolated, exhausting lives, and you're just not seeing them out in public most
Right.
often because it is so difficult to get out into the world with our situation. So we just avoid, we stay home, do our thing, and we just don't
Right.
make a fuss because
Right.
nobody is showing up for the most part.
Right. Well, and you said that statistics are driving a lot of what you're doing in the Unseen documentary. Where is that, and how can people learn more about what that documentary is and when it's going to be released, all that kind of thing?
Well, the trailer is available at caregiverdoc.com. And I think the best way to stay in the loop is to sign up for our email updates. Tentatively, I've been told by the producer that they are shooting for January for this entire production to be completed.
Okay.
They are actually headed to us next weekend for another weekend of filming, just to wrap up some loose ends and, finalize some of that production aspect of it. And then I think it's, going into the editing process, and God willing, by January is where we're hoping with that.
Okay. Just a heads up to everybody who's watching or listening. We will share all of the links that Jess is mentioning in the show notes. After this is over, we will have this video posted on the Key Ministry YouTube channel, as well as our Vimeo channel. And Beth, my coworker, just shared the caregiverdoc.com link in the chat on the webinar. So a question for you, what's the distribution plan for the documentary? Because I'm sure you want as many people and maybe even more so ministry people to see that as possible, so that, the church will kind of collectively start to get its head around, all right, what can be done to provide support to these families?
I can tell you that I'm extremely proud of the work that the producer and the filmmaker have put into making sure that everything is exactly right, so that if Netflix shows an interest, or Amazon Prime, or any of these bigger sites show any kind of interest, we have done it exactly to a T, so that they will be able to show it on their platforms. We're also going to offer screenings to ministries that are interested in this topic and exposing the mental health crisis among caregivers. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to unfold, but that will be an option as well. And then it will be on YouTube too, and it will be like an episode by episode type of production, where our family is the first family, and we highlight a few different areas of the caregivers' struggle within life. And then there will be other families that highlight different areas of struggles, just to kind of portray, the whole spectrum of what caregivers go through.
Right. Is it, if churches are interested in being a screening location, is there a way for them to sign up or to find out more about how to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if they even just email me, jess@thelucasproject.org, I will pass it along to the correct person, and we will get that set up. Okay.
All right. Again, I'm making a note of this, but we'll have this information in the show notes if you don't, capture everything that's being discussed. So, one thing that was, back to the blended book for a second, one thing that was really interesting to me in not only your personal life story, but in your husband Ryan's life story, is, from my perspective, how God really wove things into your life from your youth to prepare you for the life that you're living now. I personally just love seeing and having God reveal those hidden in plain sight kinds of things that he's doing all the time, that, most of the time we don't really recognize, but that are absolutely there. So, what would you like to share about, well, I'll just share your experience. And you came from a large family yourself. So to have 8 children is not a weird thing for you, for probably everybody else watching that would be like, ooh, I don't know how you do it. But, you grew up in a household of what, 12?
Oldest of 12, homeschooled. So very, very hands-on with all these children. I mean, I was looked to often as, hey, can you do your little sister's hair, or, help the sister or sibling get dressed, and then from there I went and nannied like all through college. Wow. Okay. So I guess I've never wanted a life without children, apparently. Yeah. And I find God's sense of humor sort of interesting, because I wouldn't say I'm like necessarily that mom who like wanted all the kids, or like had this heart for adoption or foster care, or like, I'm pretty career driven, and I don't think I would be the mold that would necessarily be that person. But in terms of like being highly organized and being able to, I think, shoulder 8 kids, it is a lot, but it's all I've ever known.
Right.
So it's
Right.
just kind of second nature.
Well, and your husband, Ryan, I mean, he had a close family friend who had significant disabilities. Is that correct?
I think 2 children that he grew up next door to, and he was
Okay.
always trying to like assist them. And they didn't know at the time, like stimming and eloping, but the
Right.
mom would be like, keep an eye on so and so. He has a tendency to wander off. And then like the
Mhm.
stimming and the head banging, and Ryan would try to like soothe them and calm
Mhm.
them down, like having no idea that he
Right.
would one day be the adopted dad to a child like very similar to these 2 kids that he grew up next door to.
Wow. Wow. It,
Yeah.
I mean, I just see God's fingerprints all over that, and I'm surprised when other people don't. But anything else that maybe didn't get included in the book that you just really feel like God prepared you for this life.
I didn't have a lot of preparation in terms of like special needs or disabilities. I do remember volunteering like in the friendship class every once in a while because my friend kind of dragged me along and was like, yeah, let's volunteer in this class at church. And
Hmm.
I wanted to hang out with her. It wasn't like so much that I had a heart for this. I just wanted to hang out with my friend basically. But even some of that exposure, I think at that time was eye-opening.
Right.
And then even we would go camping every summer. And I remember this older couple had their son living with them. He had disabilities and special needs, and he was probably 22 or 23, but we just would include him in everything that we did as teenagers. And hey,
Hmm.
Tommy, you want to come along to the candy shop with us? And sure, I'll come, and he'd come. And but outside of that, like personally, I didn't have a lot of exposure to that type
But
of
I mean, just the point of even those two examples. I mean, nothing is wasted in God's economy, and
right.
that's what I see. In that is that, and we may never, we certainly won't know all those things this side of eternity. But I think it's really fascinating when you can pinpoint. Oh my goodness, these things really
Right.
made a difference in what I'm living today. So
I think for me, it's more, I kind of consider myself like a reluctant caregiver.
okay,
And it's the Lord has used like all these children in Lucas to like chip away at me
yeah,
and make me like what he's after,
right,
because there's nothing as that will humble you like having to care for a person for the rest of his life for him to
right,
live.
right,
And like I said, I'm not that necessarily that super nurturing type of personality, but the Lord brings me to my knees every day and I have to
hmm,
lay it before him and
hmm,
recognize that this is his calling on my life. And I have a
right,
choice. I can be obedient or not be obedient.
right,
And
right.
so it's daily laying down your life, picking up your cross and
Mhm.
following him.
Right. Well, I mean, but from where I sit, I mean, I totally hear what you're saying there. But he has equipped you. I mean, because look at your writing gifts, and I mean, you have a master's degree in English, isn't that correct?
Mhm.
Yeah, and I mean, you're communicating to to people exactly where they are, through the mediums that he's been able to give us, and um, I mean, anyway, I just think that it's really amazing how if we let him, like you just said, if we let him, he will just make some really incredible things happen
Mhm.
out of our lives, and even when it is difficult and hard.
Yeah, your purpose will find you if you're open to
Yes,
that.
yes, it
And I
sure
never in a
will.
million years thought my purpose had to do with like advocacy work.
Right,
And here
right,
I am.
right. Well, there's a lot of type A's needed for the endurance required,
Right,
for
right.
advocacy work. Um, so before we started recording, if you just jumped on like right at 12, we were talking a little bit about her first marriage, and her first husband passed away as a young man from glioblastoma brain tumor. And in the book, I thought it was so insightful. You were talking about the end of the covenant of your first marriage. and the importance of not creating an idol about the memories that you had with your husband, because I mean, we all have faulty memories, and especially if you're having a hard time with something today, you know, what happened 5 years ago might look a whole lot rosier than it really actually was. You know, and it's, you know, it's just so easy to fall into that trap, even as believers and people who really want to honor Christ with all that, you know, their lives are about. And social media just makes that so, you know, so much more likely in our lives. You know, like you know, I have a couple of friends that just, you know, it looks like everything on their social media is absolutely perfect, and it makes you just kind of want to punch something. But
Right.
but you know, that's not reality, even for, you know, the friends who have the perfect life, even in person. So
Right.
you know, you talked about a couple of things that, you know, you guys had done that were real deliberate to try to prevent any kind of glorifying of the previous marriages, the, you know, the spouses who had passed away. You know, what are some of those things that were really helpful for you and Ryan to just avoid that trap that bad memories and comparisons can become?
I don't know that we were so great at it initially. And I think it caused some problems in our relationship where we overshared and kind of grieved together when we should have probably found a therapist and worked through some of the feelings that we were feeling. Because I know initially, I think we both felt like that spouse was sainted because,
Right.
you know, never speak ill of the dead. So he
Right.
would share all these wonderful attributes and I would share all these wonderful attributes. And then we're living together as sinful human beings, getting on each other's nerves and, you know, all
Right.
the things that married people do. Like,
Right.
you're not perfect. So I would say about 2 years in, we finally did seek out therapy, and that was very helpful. And even just recognizing that a lot of those intimate details didn't necessarily need to be shared with each other. They could be held sacred within our own hearts for that relationship that we had had with that person. And we didn't necessarily need to bring that all to the new marriage because it wasn't fair to the other person to
Right.
constantly get every single conversation through a lens of perfection about
Right.
this other human being. But it took us a while to get there. And even today, you know, we kind of see that with our kids. Like, I'll have one of my girls do chores or whatever, and there'll be this perception of my mom in heaven would have never. And Ryan's like, your mom in heaven had you do chores too. This isn't like
Nice try,
unique
kid.
to this mom. Your other
Yeah.
mom had a whole chore chart for you too. So
Right.
I think balancing those memories with like a good hearty dose of reality too. And we've always been good about that with our kids. I think, like, yes, that parent loved you immensely, would have done anything for you, but also had
Right.
a chore chart for you.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah.
and I don't know, that's worked for us. And as time's gone on with myself and Ryan, our history has kind of overtaken some of that history. You know, when we first got married, it was all we had to talk about because
Right.
we had these histories with these other people. Now, 11 years in, like, we have a really deep history with each other and with our family.
Right.
So that stuff doesn't come up as often.
But is that true for the kids too? Do they try the, you know, my other mom card quite as often as they did a few years ago?
You know, as I've gotten older, we do see kind of a gravitational pull towards the bio parents.
Okay.
And
Interesting.
we've read the books, we've read everything Ron Deal puts out there, and that's very normal. And at first it kind of hurt my feelings as a mom, to see my daughters sort of gravitating towards dad. But then hearing that that is the natural progression, where the bios do kind of gravitate towards that parent that they share blood with. What was the question that you posed?
You and Ryan, had to make sure that, your former spouses weren't saints. And have
Right.
the kids been able to also do that, or are they still playing the Saint Mom card when, you know, there's
Yeah, I think
tension?
our kids too have figured out like a level of manipulation, maybe within the world, where as soon as people find out like they have a parent that passed away, there's, and I don't want this to come across the wrong way, but there are some perks to having that
That's right. Yeah.
narrative in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. Victimization is strong in our
Yes.
culture.
They've learned how to kind of maybe milk that a little bit if they need
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's very honest, and it's refreshing that, you know, I mean, because I'm sure some people look at you and think that you are a saint. And I
Oh, I
kind of
don't think
do.
so.
Well, but you know, but it's refreshing to hear that, you know, even saints have children with flaws. So
Yeah.
yeah,
We're not living a sainted reality at all. I would say with 5 teenagers, there's a lot of big feelings going on right now.
yeah. Oh goodness, I can only imagine. Yeah. Um, well, speaking of teenagers and, you know, all of the family dynamics, you know, one thing that you talked about in the book, you know, a lot was how important boundaries were for you and Ryan to make your marriage work. And then also, you know, boundaries and firm life management for your kids too, because, you know, even with, you know, even with, you know, being accustomed to have a lot of people all the time, it's a lot if, you know, if there's not a really good structure in place just for, you know, making sure people are getting to bed on time and getting enough rest and getting the laundry done and you know, lunches for school and that sort of thing. But you know, what are some of the boundaries that you would say have been most important to you, you know, personally, to maintain mental and spiritual health? Just because, you know, your daily life is pretty darn challenging, I'm sure. um,
Mhm.
so, you know, what are some of those things you would recommend, you know, maybe to others who are in the middle of a demanding life as well?
I think, and this is where maybe my history comes into play, and to give my mom props, she was really good at boundaries and structure. And I think
With
maybe
12
not
kids.
every, what's that? Yeah, with 12 kids, and
With
maybe
12
not
kids.
everybody needs to operate that way, but I know like myself, I'm a highly sensitive person and I can't live in chaos. Like I
Mhm.
need to know the boundaries and the rules and what's expected of everybody. And I do think people and children in general function optimally when they know the expectations and they
Right.
have those boundaries in place. We've always been really good about bedtime, and not even, bedtime for the older kids, but like mom and dad are going to our room at 8 o'clock and we are done for the night and we're going
Mhm.
to watch our shows together and spend some time together. And the kids honor that. They respect it. If they need something, we do get the knocks at the door,
Mhm.
but they do honor that
Mhm.
because we've done it from day one. And then just personally, like for our marriage and for myself, we pray together every day before we start our day, and we walk together every morning 2 miles before we go off to our separate work environments.
Mhm.
And that's just always been a really good way for us to connect, I think, and talk about, stuff that's going on, and even bring our issues to a higher power and
Right.
say, we are really struggling with this. We lay it at your feet. And then, there's something to movement and getting that stress out of your body. And
Right.
I think in a weird way, we've been doing that, but maybe not even recognizing that we're doing that because we do have such busy lives. Just
Mhm.
getting that walk in and shaking that stress and fight or flight out of our bodies, and then getting on with our days. And then in terms with our kids, the dinner table's always been a top priority for our family,
Mhm.
and gathering around the dinner table, even more so than all the activities that they could be in and want to be in.
Mhm.
And how we've maneuvered through that is you can pick one activity and it better be something you really want to do.
Right.
and that's and that's about it. And that only starts like in middle school, because
Mhm.
the dinner table is that important. And then, going to church and involving our kids in Wednesday night church, and those
Mhm.
things to us are more important than having them in every single activity under the sun.
Right.
We want to gather around the table, have those conversations, and dive deep. And we are a blended family, and I think we have to take those extra steps and precautions to
Right.
protect our family.
Yeah, there was a study done by, I think it was Columbia University. It was either in the late 90s or the early 2000s about um, basically, kids that had the family dinner table, 5+ nights a week, on like basically every benchmark of life, they did better. So, I mean, that's just wisdom for families of any size.
Yeah.
So,
And that's putting your phones away, putting your screens
yeah,
away. You're going to sit here and either stare at us or you're going to talk for
yeah,
30 minutes and then
right,
you can be on your merry way.
yeah. Well, so you mentioned church. I know you've had an interesting church history just because of the extra needs that Lucas
Mhm.
has. So what is church like for you now, and what has church been like for you, um, you know, with the pandemic? Because I think that's been a struggle that everybody can relate to for sure.
Mhm. It's complicated. With the pandemic, we didn't go for about a year.
Mhm.
Churches shut down. And then with our move to Michigan, I've put out a few things on social media, and it was so funny. Within weeks after our move to Michigan, I had 4 churches reach out to me and say, we don't have a special needs ministry, but if you're willing to come and teach us, we will start it. And I thought,
Wow,
that's just
that's great.
incredible. That is the West Michigan pocket. It's just a really unique pocket of the world where if there's a problem, how do we fix it?
Yeah,
And so I've met with 2 of these churches. One actually does have the special needs ministry. The other one is starting it up. And then the other 2 are kind of on the back burner because I'm like, let's just start 2 at a time and
right,
see.
right.
And we're attending the one church this weekend, just to see if that would be a good fit. And then we have the other church the following weekend. But just the fact that they would go above and beyond and even create something for one
Yeah,
child, but
yeah,
just to say, yes, you are welcome here.
yeah.
I think that's pretty incredible.
That's I mean, and that's what happens in a lot of churches that have special needs ministry. They do have a family that has the one
Mhm.
child, and then all of a sudden, they realize that there's families all over their community who are just as hungry for the
Mhm.
fellowship and spiritual food of being fed on the Word of God. And well, that's fabulous. Well, and definitely point them our way too if they need
Okay.
some like really in-depth information, and we've
Right.
got it. So
Well, another thing about church too is I think some of the general consensus that I've heard is that special needs families don't want to attend, or it's too much work, or that has not been my experience. We want to attend, like it's respite
mhm,
for us. Like Luke
mhm,
likes to stay busy, and to get him out of the house for a couple of hours in the morning, I mean, that's fantastic. But I think some of these churches too also want the parents to be involved.
right,
And I have no desire for that.
right,
I'll stay home and watch it on TV. I don't want to show up and have to take care of my son, who I'm in desperate need of a break from to begin with,
right,
and miss the community with the rest of the believers and miss the
right,
entire church service because I'm back there with Lucas.
right,
I want to know that I'm leaving him in competent hands. And I think a lot of families do view it kind of as a respite opportunity with the
right.
right environment.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. um yeah, that's a good word. It's not I'm sure that it's not that families don't understand that there's a need for volunteers. There's always a need for volunteers, and to take a turn is one thing, but to have to do the same thing week after week, I mean, I can totally understand why people just give up. But that
Yeah.
also makes opportunity for things like churches in the home or churches in your community, which we've talked about earlier this year. Jillian Palmiato did a great couple of blog posts about that, and I'll share the links in the show notes about creating house church if you have individuals that have special needs in your community. So um, again, if you are on the webinar or if you are on the Facebook Live, feel free to share questions. And we will definitely try to work them in as time allows. And just another reminder, when we get finished with this, the video will be posted on the Key Ministry Vimeo page and YouTube channel, and we will have all of the links that are discussed in the show notes if you miss any of them here. So we were just talking about, special needs ministry in churches, whether or not they have it, how awesome it is that these churches want to start special needs ministry. Well, last summer, August of 2020, your husband Ryan wrote a guest post for us about things that churches can and should be doing to help support families that have a family member with disabilities. So, a couple things that he brought up was having your small group or your life group as a support system, bringing dinner periodically, or sitting with a child who has some extra needs, bringing the church to the family, going to make disciples, not just letting people come and see. So is there anything else you would like to add to that list? I mean, especially since you've just recently moved. I mean, I'm sure, it's so challenging anyway to uproot, but what are some things that just are top of mind that really any church could do to come alongside a family like yours?
Well, I think Ryan's idea was fantastic, and that is the small group idea, where basically your small group would adopt a family, a special needs family, and show up for them maybe once a month and offer respite for 4 or 5 hours so mom and dad can get a break. I think coming alongside a specific family, you're going to start to get to know that family. You're going to start to get to know their child, and you're going to start to form these relationships that you really need, because that family needs to be able to trust you. Right. And your group with this child. And then, I understand kind of the scary factor if you're not familiar with disabilities, or you're not familiar with children with special needs, and being a little bit nervous. But if there's a whole small group of you, right, 5 or 6 adults, I think it takes away some of that fear factor. And I think just meeting that family where they're at with meals or haircuts for their children, or helping to mow their lawn or weed their flower beds, and that's where those relationships are going to come into play, though. And you're not going to know if you're not forming those intimate connections with that family. Right. And then in terms of churches, a 4 or 5 hour chunk of time once a month, where you just open your doors and say, drop off your kids, you guys go take a break. We're going to provide this awesome opportunity for, and maybe it's, the kids with special needs and the siblings. That's what we did with the Lucas Project. And it was so wonderful for us, the parents, the caregivers, to have like that 4 or 5 hour chunk of time just to decompress, get groceries, take a nap, grab some lunch at Panera Bread. And I think that's, in my opinion, where respite often falls short, is these 2 or 3 hour chunks of time. You just convince your child that you're going to do something out of the ordinary, especially with autism, which is like a whole hurdle to get them, to comply and to be excited about this idea. You drop them off, you explain everything that has to do with your child, you fill out all the paperwork, rush out to dinner for an hour, and then you have to rush back to get your kid. To me, it's just not enough time to really allow the caregivers to decompress and take a breath and feel relaxed by the time they get their kid back.
Right. Well, and ministry leaders, I think, I hope that you'll take note of what Jess just said. And seriously, there's a lot of nuggets that, are coming forth that are things that can be helpful to families. And just a little aside, children who have disabilities grow up to become adults who have disabilities. And so, anything that is applicable to a family with a child with disabilities is also applicable to that family who has an adult with disabilities who, maybe can't care for themselves. Just a little personal experience to share. We have dear friends who my husband got into a men's group with the husband, who's a quadriplegic. I mean, he had a neck injury 40 years ago, and he's been quadriplegic ever since. And so, long story short, what worked best for them was small group meeting in their home, which happened for years and years. And, you know, it's just like you said, you know, like the needs that came up, you know, there would be people from the group who would meet the needs because they became friends. You know,
Right.
there was nothing artificial about it. You know, it was just like, I mean, their family and just the relationships were so normal. It was like the chair wasn't even there, you know? And I mean, that's really what doing life together is supposed to be like. So.
And just one other thing too, as these kids get older, it was easy to find activities for Luke when he was 7 or 8 years old. Even like YMCA day camps or
Right.
VBS programs during the summer, they would take him, they would just integrate him. And he was,
Right.
you know, little and cute. A 17, 18-year-old, nothing all summer long.
Yeah.
There is nothing. And
Yeah.
if you could even provide like a VBS program for a couple of hours, you know, for these families, if there's, you know, intellectual disability along with these other diagnoses, these Lucas wouldn't have any problem hanging out with, you know, 10, 11, 12-year olds. He loves his siblings. He loves hanging out with them. So I don't think it has to necessarily even be age appropriate. They just
Right.
want something to do. They want to be included somehow.
Sure.
And yeah, you're right. When the kids grow up, there's nothing. There's
Yeah.
absolutely nothing. And especially if they're incontinent, like nobody wants them.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, so that's another kind of transition cliff that you're talking about, you know, not even, I mean, there's that term, the transition cliff, that is familiar to parents, particularly who have children on the autism spectrum, because once they get to be, you know, either 18 or 22, depending on where you live, the publicly available services just dry up. And
Oh yeah.
so it becomes quite the challenge for parents. So ministry leaders who are watching this, you know, do not forget these families who have children who are growing up. So, well, I want to ask you a question because I think that this is really relevant in the world in which we live. And it is really disheartening, but you can say the most innocent thing, and I'm not talking just about you, I'm talking about Key Ministry, I'm talking about anybody who has any kind of voice in social media, but you know, you can say the most innocent thing and receive, you know, a gazillion messages of hatred and how you are just a horrendous human being for whatever it was that you said or didn't say correctly. And, you know, there's very much that world of people who, you know, who are very outspoken about parents who speak on behalf of their child. And honestly, I mean, I think, and I think that you recognize this. I wouldn't pose this to you if I didn't think you recognized it. But to me anyway, there is a distinct difference in advocating for caregivers and for children like your son who has profound disabilities. He will never be able to take care of himself. I mean, that's just reality. There's a world of difference between the kind of advocacy that you do versus parents who have a child who is on the autism spectrum or has a disability, but at some point they will be able to advocate for themselves. So, you know, how have you been able to not take all of the backlash personally? You know, because it can feel incredibly personal when people either refuse to understand that there is a difference, or you know, some people just have a really short fuse and it doesn't take much to set them off. So, I mean, like, what's been some ways that you have distanced yourself from this and been able to support your mental health through this kind of thing?
Well, as you know, it got really intense for me, I think in June or July, and I felt the Lord saying, just take a break. And I was like, I can't take a break. I just launched a book. Like, I have to go online and talk about my book. And I just felt very firmly, take a break. You know, there's blessing in obedience. So I had to step away because the hatred was getting really intense. And just, I think stepping away allowed me to think about it and to realize it's not personal. I mean, there is so much anger right now in the world, just bubbling. Like, everybody's so angry. And I think it has to do with so much of what's going on in the world. It has to do with the fact that we're not in community very well. We're, sitting on our phones and our screens and our social media accounts, and we're not getting together with people and like making those connections. And that's what I did during that period of time where I was not really on social media a whole lot, was finding those friendships, meeting, for coffee with girlfriends, and moving forward, I've figured out the language that seems to be triggering. And for a lot of people, they viewed Luke as autistic. And that seems to be a trigger point for people. And Luke is not just autistic. There's like a complete package that encompasses who Lucas is. Autism's one of numerous diagnoses.
Right.
So I've eliminated some of that language from how I write and post. And I think that has helped, because autism is not just who Lucas is. Lucas
Right.
is a total care individual with many complex needs, and he will be for the rest of his life. And then just some tangible things. I've had to kind of rethink what my platform is going to look like. It's not going to be so personal anymore. It's going to be more about the work and about getting what I write out into the world and getting my advocacy out into the world. And part of that did include hiring somebody to help mediate and monitor my social media accounts, because I don't want to go on there and see that people want to kill me because
Right.
I'm, advocating for caregivers. I don't want to go on there and see people saying that Lucas should kill me while I'm sleeping, or I should be neutered, or these are all comments that have come my way, and she takes care of it now. And that has helped my mental health. It wasn't very expensive, and I just don't see it anymore. And I guess ignorance is bliss, because I'm going to continue to do what I feel like the Lord wants me to do, and framing it as my story.
Right.
I'm not sharing Lucas's story. I'm
Right.
sharing my struggles as a caregiver. And anybody who's written a memoir, is sharing their story, and their story
right.
does involve other people, just like my story involves Lucas and my children and my husband. And I try to be honoring and respectful of
Right.
how I frame that. But it is my journey as a caregiver.
Right.
And we're not going to see changes or make changes in the caregiving world unless we peel back that curtain a little bit and expose our lives a little bit.
Right.
And this doesn't mean you're putting pictures of your kid in the bathtub, like on social media, but you do have to paint that picture very delicately so that other people know, or they don't know. And if they don't know, they're not going to help.
Right. Well, and I mean, what you just said can be summed up as the balance of truth and grace. And that's exactly what Jesus did in his life. People hated him or they loved him. And so he said, as it was for him, it was going to be for his followers. And the highest thing that we can do is to be obedient to what he calls us to do, no matter what the cost is. Like you said earlier today, you perhaps are the reluctant caregiver. You get up in the morning, you say, Lord, give me strength for today to take your cross forward today, and then do it all again tomorrow.
Right. Manna for the moment.
That's right. That's right. So, yeah, I mean, it's the word of our testimony, not somebody else's testimony, but our testimony, and the blood of the Lamb is what overcomes. And so I just salute your thoughtfulness in trying to go about this in a way that is honoring to Lucas, and and truthful all at the same time, because I think that people who don't speak out or don't write have no idea how difficult it can be to balance those things, but yet how there's no change. Jesus said, you will know the truth and the truth will make you free. If you can't speak about the truth, you can never, you can never get the right diagnosis. You can never get the right therapies. You can never get the right help. You can not get resolution to so many things in this world if you're not willing to speak the truth. So.
Right. And I think that's acceptable for so many other arenas in life, but it seems to be like taboo for caregivers, especially caregivers if there's a child on the spectrum,
Mhm.
to speak about the difficulties. And that's where I think for me personally, the beauty of poetry comes
Mhm.
through, because you can write a poem, and I've shared some of mine with you, and it's just open to interpretation.
Right.
I know the meaning behind it, but it's vague enough where,
Yeah.
there's different interpretations that you can take with a certain poem. And that's been a very effective tool for me, I think, in being able to spread advocacy in this area of life.
Mhm. Well, so we're coming up on, it's 12:51 right now. I want to be respectful of your time and the time of everybody on the call. Uh, in the chat on the webinar, an attendee says that she has a 6-year-old daughter who's severely disabled. She's in a small church. And one of her respite workers also keeps nursery so that they can go to church. That's fabulous. She'd love for her church to have a special needs ministry, but it would depend on her to get it off the ground, or the baby steps I can start with. I'll just say, that we have a lot of information on our website, and thank you for your comment, by the way. We have a lot of information on our website on how any church can get started with special needs ministry. Sandra Peoples, who writes for Key Ministry, her husband is a pastor. They're in a fairly small to medium-sized church, and she has written a lot about doing special needs ministry in a smaller church. But Jess, I'll throw that out to you as well, since she's asking the question in the chat. What are some baby steps that she can start with to launch special needs ministry in a small church?
I think if it were me, I would figure out who I needed to talk to, and I would set up a meeting.
Mhm. Yeah.
I think oftentimes, people don't know until you
Yep.
bring it to their attention. And it's really that simple. Who do I need to email to get a conversation going about this? Because we want to stay involved in this church, and we want this to be our church home. But we also want it to be our daughter's
Right.
church home. And in order for that to occur, this is what we're going to need in place. And I think most churches are extremely receptive to that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Excellent. Excellent. Well, and there was a comment on our Facebook live stream that from a woman whose son is 30, but she can't leave him, long enough to go to the bathroom. And it sounds like she's really looking forward to the Unseen documentary. So we'll wrap up in just a second, but I really want to conclude with this question, and then we'll share your socials and a little bit more information about the Unseen documentary. But, I think it's really easy for people to think about losses, things that you can't do, things that are, just negatives from having disabilities, either yourself or with, someone that you love. But God loves to turn things right side up, or, upside down, or right side up, however you want to view that. And there was this quote that you wrote in your blended book that said, "Struggle has a way of forcing beauty to the surface." So what beauty have you seen in the lives of either, your children, in their lives and their relationship with Christ? Or what would you like the church to know that is something that's really beautiful in this world where God has you with disability and the caregiver mental health challenges?
You want me to start with my kids or the
You start
general?
however you want to go.
I watch my kids interact with Lucas, and I'm blown away. I can't believe how patient they are, how understanding they are, and that translates into so many other areas of their life.
Mhm.
They'll come across another child with disabilities or special needs, and they are trying to include these children. They're not pushing them away, and I think that's because they're so familiar with that scenario. And my son Josh, he's 11, he's Luke's best friend, and they just have this relationship that is so precious. They sit and do iPads together, and Josh teaches him all his letter boards, and he taught Luke how to spell hi and eat. And every morning he taught Luke to say hi. So every morning Luke comes out, he looks at Josh, hi. And we all get like a big laugh out of it because Josh taught him that. And so just, I think, seeing how much more empathy that they have, and what fantastic human beings they're turning out to be. I know a lot of people will view siblings and say, oh, they're shortchanged or whatever because they have this brother who requires so much. But I look at it sort of in an upside down way, like you said, like, no, they're gaining kingdom
Right.
virtues like patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control.
Right.
That's what you want from your kids, not like, oh, they got the latest iPad or iPhone, or like
Right.
they beat this level on whatever video game they're playing, or like, those are the attributes that I want to see in my children. And I
Yeah.
think Luke has really brought that out in them. And then just to continue on that thread, he's brought that out in me. Like I said, I'm sort of this reluctant caregiver, but the Lord just keeps like chipping away. And I don't know, I often sort of think of it as Esther, like, such a time as this, I've given
Right.
you this beautiful child, and this is what I'm calling you to do, to bring awareness to the struggles and advocacy. And if at the end of my life, I can look back and think, wow, like Luke and I did it. We did our purpose. We served our purpose. We ran our race. Then fantastic.
I mean, there's nothing greater, right? I mean, that's
No,
getting well done, good and faithful servant when you
right,
see Jesus face to face.
right. And that's what I live for. I really do. I don't do it perfectly by any means. And I get frustrated and upset, and as we all do. But again, it's like manna for the moment every day, laying down my life. And there's nothing more humbling than every single day upon waking, I have to go get my grown 17-year-old son ready for the day, because he would not live if
Right.
either myself or Ryan did not get him dressed, feed him his food, walk him out to the bus, the whole 9 yards every day. And that, like I keep coming back to, there's blessing and obedience.
Right.
I don't know what my books are going to do, or my nonprofit, or if this documentary might catapult my family into some realm that I am not prepared for at all, but still I will have to get up every day
Right.
and take care of this individual who cannot take care of himself.
That's right.
And that's actually what makes Jesus smile. It's not all the other stuff.
Right.
And that's the holy work.
That is holy work. That is. Well, Jess, I just appreciate so much your time today. If you would just tell us your social media, how people can connect with you, and again, the release date, your expected release date for the Unseen documentary.
Projected release date, they're telling me, is January-ish. And you can check out more information on that at caregiverdoc.com. The nonprofit that I started is the lucasproject.org, and we provide recognition and respite for caregivers. And part of that recognition is the documentary project that we're doing. And then my website's justplusthemess.com. I'm not super active there, but it's there.
Okay.
And then Just Plus the Mess on Facebook and Instagram for the most part.
Okay. And can people connect with you by email through your website? Yeah. Okay.
justplusthemess@gmail.com.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much again. And we will again have the video posted on the Key Ministry YouTube and Vimeo channels later today. So thank you so much for spending a little time with us today. And we look forward to seeing you back again here real soon. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.